The Infiltrator perk deck. This is a very interesting perk deck because it's the only one to deal with your melee skills, and there's a lot of interesting stuff in this, so let's see what this perk deck has to offer, shall we? Of course, like any other perk deck, every other aspect of it is the same, so helmet popping, blending in, walk-in closet, and fast and furious are all shared with the other perk decks. So let's take a look at what's different. Basic close combat. When you are close to an enemy, you receive 4% less damage from enemies. Alright. Advanced close combat. When you are close to an enemy, you receive an additional 4% less damage from enemies. So that's 8% so far. Expert close combat. When you are close to an enemy, you receive 4% less damage from enemies. So that's 12 now. Each successful melee hit grants an additional 10% melee damage boost for 6 seconds that can stack up to 4 times. So theoretically, that's 40% extra melee damage for 6 seconds if you land 4 successful hits. That seems like a lot. Overdog. When you are surrounded by 3 enemies or more, you receive an additional 8% less damage from enemies. So all in total, that's 20% less damage as long as you're being surrounded by 3 or more enemies. Or, yeah, well, this one's a little bit different than the others because the other ones are when you're close to an enemy, but this one is when you're surrounded by enemies. So theoretically, you can get up to 20% less damage. As for the second aspect of Overdog, each successful melee hit grants an additional 10% melee damage boost for 6 seconds that can stack up to 4 times. So this seems exactly the same as Expert Close Combat. So this one gave 40% extra melee damage. I guess if it stacks with this skill, then you get 80% damage boost with your melee for 6 seconds if you can stack your melee hits a whole bunch of times. Alright, now for the last part, Life Drain. Striking an enemy with your melee regenerates 10% of your health. This cannot occur more than once every 15 seconds. So, if you strike an enemy with your melee every 15 seconds or so, you could potentially get back 40% of your health within a minute. That's quite a lot, and it does sound very nice, though in practice it's very different. In fact, for this tree, it does sound like a lot of the things are very nice, but in practice, how often are you actually going to be using your melee, and like that religiously where you stack it up to get all that damage and you chain kills with it? It doesn't really happen all that often. So it is very nice. It's a very interesting perk deck, whereas the other ones are straight up, you get some health, you get some armor, you get some dodge. That's pretty much it. This one is a bit more interesting, and because of it, I've toyed with it quite a bit with different builds and such. And, well, I just want to share what I think about this perk deck, but I am completely open to any and all comments about it, because I want to know what you guys think about this as well. So, let's get into some gameplay, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. So the biggest problem with me for this perk deck is that I just had a hard time finding a build for it, Most of the melee aspects, they are nice because that extra damage is really handy, but it forces you to really single out people, and, melee in general is just a bad idea because you can only focus on pretty much one person at a time, no matter how much damage you're actually doing. So what ended up happening was I started using this perk deck just for life drain. Not even like thinking about the melee aspects. Right now I'm going full enforcer. I think this is this setup I have is probably one of the better ones for this perk deck, but I'll show the skills later. Right now let's actually just talk about what I used it with and what I didn't like it with as well. So pretty much I started creating builds revolving around the life drain. Like, right now, this Enforcer build does not have Berserker, so I will be able to utilize Life Drain and not be punished for it, I'm not missing out on any extra damage by having low health. And because of the Life Drain, the first thing you can think of is, well, what if you tried doing it with, like, a Mastermind build? As a healer, you're the healer, and you can heal yourself. So you pick up, like, Hostage Taker, and stuff like that, right? turns out, it sounds nice, but I really hated it because I had to play Mastermind with armor, and that means no dodge. And you miss out a lot with a Mastermind that doesn't have dodge, because your survivability as a Mastermind is, you know, it's held either by your dodge or your armor, and if you don't have any dodge, you have to go with armor. But your armor is really bad, you know, unlike a Tech Forcer, which can get almost 300 armor. At best, the Mastermind can get like 130, and that's with the combined tactical vest and bulletproof. So your survivability isn't all that great, and I kind of really did not like that build at all. You know, I would much rather have the dodge for survivability, especially as a Mastermind. So I kind of threw that build out the window. Okay. And obviously, this perk deck caters to tank setups because, well, in the perk deck, you get damage reduction, but you don't get anything else. So you don't get armor, you don't get health, you don't get dodge. So any person that runs a, you know, a fast, speedy dodge build is not gonna get any use out of this perk deck. No matter how much they like melee, it's just not gonna happen. You don't have any survivability on higher difficulties. And pretty much everything I'm discussing is just stuff I've experienced on Death Wish. So please make note of that, because I can actually see this perk deck being loads of fun on lower difficulties. But, you know, that's lower difficulties. Like overkill, hard for... Hey! Yeah. Anything overkill and below, pretty much. And that guy is still alive. Well, time to go get some life drain on, right? That's what it's useful for anyway. Don't mind me, just head glitching the taser here. So this is pretty much what I see the most use out of this build for. Just a tank build that doesn't rely on Berserker, and if you play really smart, you can end up, you know, getting a lot of your health back just by meleeing every now and then. See, you know, I'm no longer nearly so close to death. But using this perk deck simply because of the melee is just, it's all kinds of bad, because melee overall is just really... It's just not good for going loud. You know, there are a lot of things that are bad with it. You can only focus on one enemy. It doesn't really do enough to really give you a reason to use it all the time. You know, you can kind of use it if you've knocked down an enemy and you're cleaning up a kill, save a bullet or two, but other than that, it's not worth it. Which is why I think the perk deck itself is just overall kind of bad, because the skills, you know, require you to melee a whole bunch of times consecutively to build up damage, right? And it only lasts for 6 seconds, which is not very long. Although you can rack up a lot of damage this way, you need to have, like, the right melee, you know, fast ones, like the Psycho Knife, the Trench Knife, or the Toothbrush. And overall, you just need to be focusing on meleeing when, you know, there are a lot of better options, especially when you can shoot. Nope, excuse me. But yeah, overall, like, the use of this perk deck is, you know, as a side grade to tank setups. Because as a full-on Enforcer, I only get 170 armor with my ICTV. You know, if I had Bulletproof, that's a whole different story, because I would have like 250 armor, and if I picked up the armor perk deck, I would have close to 300 armor, which is crazy insane. But currently, I only have 170 armor. If I use the armor perk deck, I would only have 200 armor, which isn't all that much different, so I find it to be a worthy side grade in this situation, because... Oh, Jesus. Oh, no! I got stuck. Yeah. A worthy side grade, because if I play smart enough, I can actually end up, you know, building my health back from this, you know, small sliver back to a good chunk. But you have to play very smart. Can't see. But as I mentioned, and as you can see right there, melee is just not a good idea for going loud because you get way too focused on it. It puts you in tunnel vision a lot more than a sniper ever will. And you just end up focusing on one person, and you'll get caught in bad situations. You end up dying more because you want to melee than actually, you know, killing anybody. Although one nice thing about this perk deck is for life drain, you can life drain off of dominant people, so it is kind of wise to have dominated guards, and if you want to, you can just heal off of them for a while. Use a weak melee. That was a nade. So overall, I think this perk deck, it's not really super amazing. But at the same time, if played right, I don't think it's bad either. It's just for a person like me, I really don't see too much use in it. But it can be decent, you know? The melee itself is whatever. You know, if you can find a use for melee, then more power to you. But mostly, I just see it because of the life drain. It's time to bring out the judge. They're swarming us pretty hard. Never mind, they're all gone. Nah, not anymore. Someone take care of that dozer, please. There we go. He's dead, though. Yeah, it's just, as like an enforcer, it's just so much more handy to shotgun things. You know, in that odd situation where, like you saw there, I one-shot a tan guy and he fell over to the ground. I just need a little bit of damage to kill him. You know, I can hit him with a melee, grab some health back, and actually just outright kill him. You know, and in like these situations, it's very nice. Just like right there. I didn't get the headshot, but got the body shot. Just finish it up with a melee, more than enough to kill them. And you slowly build up health again. So the life drain aspect is pretty much the biggest thing I see in this perk deck in general. Because I've really tried a lot the past few days to play on Death Wish and to use my melee a lot, but it just never ends up working well. You know, it's always just better to have your shotgun, or to have your pistol, or whatever weapon you have, and just shoot. I should probably put down ammo too, because two guys are running a little low. That's bad. Uh-oh. That's a sniper getting out of there. So lucky he missed. So I mean that's a lot of talk from me saying that it's melee is really not something you should be doing anyway. But say it was an option and you did want to try it out yourself. For melee, definitely you have to go with the fast swinging ones for this to get the most out of this perk deck. I've tried it with some of the, you know, like the knives and such. It's pretty much useless with those. Fist, useless. Oh, there's two of them. Yeah, see, I can do a fair amount of damage, but I have to chain a lot of them. And I have to be using some really funky tactics, you know, I have to like turn around, make sure I kite them well enough. You can also try using this with the heavy hitting melees, like the baseball bat, the ding dong, the spear of freedom, stuff like that, fire axe. The biggest problem with those is that with the very short time frame you have of using the damage boost, I find it to be less handy to use, you know, the hard-hitting ones, because you just run out of your damage boost really fast. So I think it's easier to use these fast ones like the Psycho Knife and just chain a whole bunch of attacks. That's a Skull Dozer, by the way. He's already dead, so I'll just throw a nade over there anyway, because why not? Uh-oh, I'm getting tased. No, just heal up. Oh my god! Yes. Yeah, so pretty much for tank setups, I can see it being somewhat useful, but yeah, normally you wouldn't, you know, really rely on it. It's not something you have to have. That's pretty much what I'm saying. Because when you're using a tank setup already, you should have most of the skills to be combat effective in Enforcer. You should probably end up having a lot of the stuff in other trees to help with your survivability, your movement and such, and it just overall melee is not something you focus on anyway. It's a nice idea, but the problem with melee in this game is that it just lacks versatility, you know? Like I said, you can't take on more than one enemy at once. Trying to deal with specials with melee is terrible, you know? When in the world are you ever going to want to try to 1v1 a taser, or a cloaker, or a dozer with your melee? Never. There's just no reason to. So, I think some of the things that I've discussed with my friends that I would have loved to see out of this perk deck is not just straight up damage boost, but rather more versatility in the melee itself, you know? In the form of... Look at this, trying to get one guy, chain the stuff. No, it's just all bad. I would much rather see it give, like, some aspects of melee that would make it a little bit more usable. I.e., if you have, like this. If you have your melee charge, give us the ability to sprint with it, you know? Or have it so it doesn't just do damage reduction when we're surrounded by people. Have it on so with each successful melee hit, we get back a little bit armor. Or something along those lines, you know? Currently, like, you know, just straight up damage reduction when you're surrounded by people is not enough to make anybody want to use this perk deck. Because especially on higher difficulties, you will just die anyway. 20% damage reduction is not that much. Especially when the cops are hitting as hard as they do. So, pretty much to sum up, I see the most use of this perk deck in the life terrain. I don't really see anybody using it because they like melee all that much, like the melee part of it. But I can definitely see some people, you know, people that roll tank builds all the time, I can definitely see them rocking this setup with this perk deck and do well. You know, it's more of just a different way of playing. You know, you play a bit more conservatively when you have low health. You melee every now and then you'll get some health back. You can get a whole bunch of health, and you know, you don't have to actually use mini meds or a med kit. And that's pretty much how I see this build being used. So, if you see my skills here, I just have a whole bunch of Enforcer, you know. All this right here, got the Iron Man. Just a bit of Mastermind for endurance, and I can buy assets. In tech, I have some drill skills. In Ghost, some more mobility stuff. And in Fugitive, more mobility stuff. But the biggest thing to take away is that I do have martial arts, and I did have Pumping Iron. I even have Berserker Basic, so I could do more damage if I have low health. But it doesn't make sense because when you have low health and you melee, you're going to get health back, and just not going to be in Berserker range anymore. So the perk deck overall just doesn't really synergize too well with most builds that most people have created in this game already, you know. A lot of people on Death Wish, they have Berserker aced. They're going to be, you know, they either want to stay at low health and continue pressing on like that, or they're just going to heal up to avoid going to custody. You know, they never really want to be in that middle ground. If you go Technician and Enforcer, you probably have a really tanky armor setup, and you're not really going to be focusing too much on, you know, life drain. You're going to be focusing on just having a really tanky armor, so you're going to go with, like, armor or something else, or muscle. Overall, I can see this being used, but not as, like, a, you know, I gotta have this. Because at first look at this, I thought, you know, this perk deck is useless. No one's gonna use it, right? But the more I played with it, the more I could see it being useful to some people in some situations, but it's more of a side grade than anything else, you know? You really have to learn how to use it, and it's not something I quite enjoy myself. So that's what I think. I mean, the thoughts were not quite so thorough, and you know, they weren't very organized, but I just wanted to give my impressions on it. It's a decent side grade for tank builds, and that's pretty much all I can say about it. So what do you guys think? That's what I'm interested in. I want to find... I've been looking for people that really like this perk deck, and I haven't found too many. But then again, in between my little small circle of weird friends, most people just run dodge or other, you know, set builds that they don't really want to stray from. So that's all I gotta say about that. But yeah, let me know what you think.